We have one item on the agenda, and that's a discussion of RFP responses for town-owned real estate downtown. And Mr. Curt White's going to lead us in that discussion. So, Curt, take it away.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. This is a pretty exciting day, I think. I hope everyone enjoyed reading over the responses and kind of getting your wheels turning. And it's great that we now get to take this next step today. We have some of the folks who submitted responses to this are actually in attendance this afternoon. So as we get further into the presentation, and I mentioned some of the names of those different entities, just know that towards the end of this presentation, they're here and they're available if needed.
Wonderful.
So the first thing I wanted to point out was, or just review, was the goals that were stated in the RFP, and then go over the context, basically really just the area that we're looking at for the real estate in question, and then look at the evaluation tool that staff took a look at, or that utilized to help us with an evaluation of the responses. Then I just gave a really high-level overview of each of the four, because there was a lot to sort through there. I did my best to pull out the key bullet points, and then we will provide a staff prioritization as well for as much as that's useful for the board to consider. So we know that the RFP stated that the first goal was to prioritize economic development, and that meant to position the property or properties to attract vibrant tenants, increase foot traffic, and really provide a draw to the West-North Main Street area. It would also be important to support economic development, to provide the infrastructure that would support and facilitate the development. But from the very beginning, we all have recognized the importance of honoring Waxhaw's historic character, both in the scale, so the size of the potential redevelopment project, but then also in the design, in keeping with the historic downtown area. Specifically, we talked about the facade of the Niven Price building that should be improved as part of this, and then any other improvements should just contribute further to that sense of place. So placemaking was a big piece of it. And then finally, we wanted to acknowledge that this is all really was triggered or set into motion by the ULI technical assistance panel that we did last fall. It was a great community effort, board effort, and it showed a phased approach of redeveloping downtown on a number of key principles. And so we provided that report to everyone who submitted a response to this, so that they would have that understanding and that we were getting things that were consistent with that. And so those are the three goals broad goals that we established. The area we're looking at, just for anyone who's watching in the audience, we're looking at the Niven Price building here, 216 West North Main Street, the town-owned parking lot behind it. Looking at it's a vacant parcel currently. Many folks call it the community corner. It's where we hold our various town events. And while these parcels here, the McDonald House and the Waxhaw, the water tower, weren't directly called out as being offered, they are part of this broader context that need to be considered so that we have a contiguous project. I keep referencing ULI. The RFP references ULI. We just want to make sure that that we have this up there for reference. I'm not saying that this is necessarily the direction that we are going or not going, but just that this was ULI's. When they talk about a phased approach, this is where that phased approach was leading, with a redevelopment of the Niven Price building, parking lot improvements, some new commercial development, and then some public civic space. So, getting into the staff, as I've said time and time again, it's hard to do apples to apples comparisons when you're looking at this, because you have folks who are gonna, we left it to a certain extent open-ended underneath those three broad goals, because we wanted to let both the market and people's creativity help drive what we were going to, what we got. That being said, we wanted to make it quantitative as best as we could to really help us think through and process it. So we pulled together a staff committee. It was me, it was planning director, Parks and Rec director, development service director, interim town manager. We had the town attorney as part of that as well, and really tried to go through the responses in a systematic way, pulling out the three broad goals here, giving them equal weight: economic development, historic character, and future town development, but an acknowledgement as well as of capacity, both in terms of prior experience, because we've not just financial capacity, but also the experience with historic renovation, because as we talked previously in other work sessions, when you start opening up an historic building, you kind of want someone who's been there before, and someone who's had these hurdles to overcome. Also, folks who are experienced in working through the development agreement process, and who are familiar with working with government entities. We've got certainly have our nuances compared to the private. So that's what we looked at. I didn't put the actual numbers here because that would be a little bit granular for this discussion, but that's the guide we used. One final thing I'll say before we go into the responses. Our town attorney noted the other day that as we're thinking through this, and as you see people's different proposals for what they are looking for from the town, what they're offering as the developer, it's beneficial for both parties to really have the developer take charge of building the improvements, and then the town reimbursing the developer through the funds that were received from purchase of the property itself. Because that way, from the town side, it's much more efficient. You're only dealing with one contractor or one general contractor and over a project. And then from the developer side of it, you are they're getting to it lessens the amount of financing they'll need because they'll have that cash up front. It also lets them avoid having to go through the government procurement process, which is much can be more cumbersome than what they would be able to do in the private sector. Okay, so alphabetically here, the first response we got was from a group called Better World. They're actually local to Waxhaw. Really, this response, it was pretty vague in a lot of the details, and so staff had a hard time plugging it into any kind of a quantitative assessment. They did want to purchase town real estate. It wasn't completely clear which parcels and when, and then they didn't really outline town and buyer responsibility. The long and short of this one was there was insufficient information for us to make a confident assessment or a recommendation either way on this. So this one was staff consensus, kind of number 4 out of the ones we received. Going forward to the next one, First 10th Construction. This group is also pretty local, Union County, and their proposal was to purchase the Niven Price building and the at least part of the front of the community corner lot for $700,000. They would then, and I'll skip over town responsibility while I explain, the offer was a little complex. They would then put improvements, $250,000 back into the Niven Price parking lot, with the town retaining ownership of that parking lot, and as long as 50% of the spaces were reserved for the developer and the associated new uses in the Niven Price building. They would also construct a park that would be behind essentially under the water tower through the community corner lot. And then the town would actually retain ownership of that as well, So the town would have that public civic space improved, and they would also then move forward with renovating Niven Price. Their goal is restaurant use, and their goal is further food and retail use on the front part of the community corner with a new structure there. And then finally some infrastructure improvements to make it all work together with a pedestrian walkway to connect the Niven Price building to the community corner piece of it. But they are looking for then a grant from the town back to the developer to help make all this happen. So the net is really that the town would really be coming out of fund balance up to 800,000, just looking at the 1.5 million minus 700,000. In exchange, we would get a public park and some significant improvements to our infrastructure. So that was the long and short of that one. And they are here if once we get through them all, if we want to follow up with questions on that. The next one is for a group called New East Partners, and their proposal is to purchase the Niven Price building and the community corner, the entire parcel there, for 1.237 million, and then the town would then improve the Niven Price parking lot, provide some dedicated spaces back to the developer, but the town would retain ownership of the parking lot. They would then want to provide the town to provide streetscape improvements along West North Main and North Church. And the reasoning behind that, apart from the fact that those sidewalks are definitely in need of some improvement, is that the North Church Street between McDonald Street and Main Street would be improved in order to facilitate community events. They're acknowledging the loss of civic space that will result from their purchase of the community corner. So they were careful to say, we do value the space there, and they heard the town say that we have that need for civic space. They would, when it talks about securing landmark status for Niven Price, by doing a facade rehab to bring it back to its historically appropriate facade, then it could potentially make it eligible for that landmark status, which then not only does that help protect the building from future changes, but it also provides a tax benefit to the developer, 50% tax abatement from the county and town. Now, another piece is in the building, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail, is, well, so the buyer wants to build a 14,000 approximately square foot, 3-story mixed-use building on the front part of the community corner lot. And so the bottom floor would be retail, and then the top 2 floors would be office. They have discussed, or they would ask if the town would want to consider office tenancy in those top 2 floors. It's not required. It doesn't hinge on that, but that's an option that they could discuss. Then there's the 21,000 square foot residential building to line Broome Street. So what you're doing is you're pulling up, and I know you have the renditions in front of you, but what you're doing is you're really then kind of creating a new main street. You're starting to extend downtown northward by lining Broome Street across from Crossroads Coffee with a new building. The parking would be underneath the building, so you wouldn't see that from the street. And then, in addition, a 1,500 square foot retail out parcel on the Niven Price lot, kind of behind where Tangles 2 is, the old post office building. And then place a retail and restaurant and Class A office in the Niven Price building. So the long and short of it is this is kind of the full all at once ULI approach to some extent, in that you're getting a few new buildings that would be for commercial use, and trying to maintain civic space at the same time. Again, it's hard to talk about net to the town. If you assume, it just depends on the scale of the streetscape improvements. If you're assuming 300,000 just for the street improvements, then add another 100 for parking improvements. These are just numbers, not hard numbers necessarily, but that's how you can start thinking through what total town net is. The difference is that we're not just, but the town would divest of the community corner and the Niven price as part of that, so it wouldn't just be one. Team includes experience from the Development Finance Initiative out of Chapel Hill School of Government, and then another Chapel Hill area developer as well. Finally, we have Sherwood Development Group. Their proposal is to purchase just the Niven Price building. So just the Niven Price building, actually separate from the parking lot. So just actually the land that the building is on. The appraisal appraised the Niven Price building for 1.25, and that's what they're offering for just that building. The public parking would then remain at this time with the town. What they're looking for from the town in this case is just help with getting the building to a condition that would engender market rate rents. Replacing the roof, public sewer service, because right now it is on a gray water system. Grease trap for support of a restaurant. The suite that would need a complete redo is if you're looking at the building on the bottom floor on the right, that far right suite that has a lot of non-structural kind of offices that have been added over the years. They would want the town to do further improvements to the parking lot, lighting, potential paving, help with facade improvements. We have gotten a quote before for what it would take just to do one of the 3 facades. And so they're asking for help with that and also through a facade grant. They would then contribute 25% of facade improvements, provide their tenants with an upfit allowance. And the interesting, or kind of the most nuanced piece of this one is they're looking at then a first right of refusal on the parking lot behind the building to develop it within 5 years. So that means that it's still a phased approach in the sense that it would first be the building, and then within 5 years put further development on the back of the building area with the understanding that if they didn't move forward with that, then the town would be reimbursed for the improvements that we made to that parking lot. So it's if they don't develop it, the town would get a parking lot paid for. If they did, then you'd get further development. Now, what that development is negotiable. They want to understand from the board what you would want to see there. And I put a little note about their team. I thought it was interesting that they're working with a group who's did Mill on Main. And I will say, before I talk about prioritization of the responses, that all the things you've seen here are, this is their best interpretation of the board's goals, the town's goals, and the resources that we have. This is not necessarily hard and fast numbers, and this is where these things are going to be subjective, and then I'm sure that they would be looking for feedback and input from the board as to how you come to an agreement within their broad parameters that they gave. Okay, so as far as how staff prioritize the responses, as I mentioned, Better World, we just didn't have enough to go with there to really understand confidently what was being proposed. First 10th construction, we and that was the one again that is talking about the $1.5 million grant from the town to the developer, the public park, that piece. From an economic development standpoint, they are talking about adding new commercial space to the downtown with the retail and food development. They are talking about market rate uses at the Niven Price building. So there's definitely an economic development benefit there. From an infrastructure perspective, we're talking about improvements to church. We're talking about underneath the water tower, outdoor dining in that area. So there's definitely an infrastructure, and then the park itself, so there's an infrastructure improvement piece that was high there. Where it was a little, just when you compared it to the other proposals, just from a financial commitment piece, it seemed to be asking a lot from the town to have to really net come out of our funds to make this happen. That being said, it is well in context with the ULI recommendations, and this group was a little thinner on prior historic rehabilitation experience compared to the other folks. You see that we ranked New East Partners and Sherwood Development Group as both of them as number one. We're not just trying to be nice. It is really because the staff consensus is they're both viable proposals, and they both get at a lot of the goals that we have discussed. But really, it's going to be a board decision to determine what the scope of this project is going to be, because they're vastly different. New East Partners is looking at the community corner, the Niven Price building all together as one kind of holistic piece, the Church Street civic space. Sherwood Development Group is looking at just the Niven Price building, at least in the short term, still ticking those boxes of economic development and infrastructure improvement just on a different scale. So it is just going to come down to whether the board wants to do it. Are you looking at doing it all at once, or are you looking at starting smaller? But either way, both of the projects got at the goals that we were asking for. Both of the groups showed significant experience with historic rehabilitation across the state, and kind of the wherewithal of previous government public-private partnerships that we felt confident with either one of those really being a viable option. That's what I have, at least for now.
Questions from the board? We'll just go right to left.
Awesome, thank you. So Curt, I just had some overall questions before I jump into the proposals themselves. So I really appreciate the PowerPoint because I was really looking for kind of a side-by-side comparison, and I know you previously stated we couldn't really, that we would have apples and oranges, right? But for me, this is very helpful from kind of stringing together what staff values as some of the items that would need to move forward. So one of my questions, we still have the appraisal outstanding for the corner lot. When do we expect that to come in?
Before the 31st
Okay.
of this month. So could be as early as this week. Yeah, it should be.
Should be this week.
Yeah, it should be this week.
Okay, great, because I think that that's a puzzle piece that
Absolutely.
we're missing, and I think that the board needs to understand the value of all the property, especially with having that there's been 2 offers against the corner lot. For me, and this is more of a question from a board perspective, and this may have been discussed before I joined the board, but how much did we feel as though we wanted to invest in an abatement process, or how much did we want to invest back into the space? Had that been discussed?
Not in so many words.
Okay.
Well, but I'll defer to the attorney. The development agreement can go no more than 50%.
Correct.
Yeah, so.
The only limitation on municipalities in these things is that of the entire budget, you cannot contribute more than 50% of the project. So.
Great, thank you, Charlie. And then, going into the proposals themselves. So I really appreciate the fact that that we wanted to have New East wanted to take the building and wanted to get that landmark status. I think that that's really important to the vitality of our downtown and the history of our downtown. So I'm really glad to see them take that step in the proposal, in looking for our assistance to get that designation placed on the building. I think that that's really important, and that's something that stood out for me. So that was something that I really appreciated. I also really appreciate the ability to take a look at the ULI study, and they really applied the recommendations from the ULI study and gave us something that was extremely comprehensive in their proposal. So I would like to say that I really appreciate that. With Sherwood, I had a couple of concerns. As you said, Curt, we don't know what's going to happen when we would do some kind of phase 1 environmental and abatement process. And I'm really concerned about what we would find when we would start peeling back the layers of the wall and getting to the original state of the building. And I think that there's a lot that they're asking for so hoping that there's kind of room to learn in the due diligence period and negotiate.
But let me ask a clarification question. What they asked for, we're still limited by the 50%, no matter what. So whatever that list is, we're only going to spend up, the maximum we can spend is the 50%. So whatever they find in there above the 50% would be the responsibility of the developer as they build it. Okay?
Great. I'm going to reserve my questions and defer to Commissioner Lee.
I'll piggyback on yours and start with Sherwood. It seemed to me that they wanted to purchase the building, have us gut and renovate it so that they could walk in tenants. And that seems like a great deal of money give back on our end. So I wasn't as excited by that offer as some of the others. I agree it's a good offer, but that does concern me that we'll be approaching that 50% awfully quickly. I also really liked the New East Partners deal. I liked the way that it jived with the ULI, and it seemed to give a very community-focused, holistic outlook for the whole area, which I thought was very forward-thinking and very, very good. And I agree that the Better World was way too vague to even make any kind of decision on, so I'm going to lean towards, if I had to re-rank them, I would put New East as number 1 and Sherwood as number 2.
Mayor Pro Tem?
With the New East proposal for the corner lot, are we just talking the vacant land space now of the corner lot? Because you had also said that something with regard to the McDonald House and the water tower.
Yes, we're just talking about the parcel as it
Exists right
with the
now
vacant
with the
space.
vacant space. Okay, so that's leaving that. All right. I agree with Commissioner Lee that Sherwood development, it does seem that we would be contributing a great deal for them to be able to just move in and, put tenants in there, that they're asking for a lot. I like the way that New East did incorporate the ULI in their proposal and looking at the downtown. I thought it was very well laid out. And I too would put them as number 1 with Sherwood as number 2. The other proposal from Better World was definitely extremely vague without any detailed information that would be needed to make a good decision. And First 10th construction, that too I wasn't very enthused about as New East and the Sherwood development. So New East would be number 1, Sherwood would be number 2 with me as well.
Commissioner Westlake?
Okay.
I'm actually going to agree with the other commissioners here. I'm not sure we're getting enough from Sherwood to actually accomplish our goals that we're wanting to revitalize the downtown area. And New East, I like the fact that they've incorporated the entire block. They've added many of the aspects that were in the ULI. We have extra retail, commercial space, plus the civic space, walkways, in between the buildings. I think the overall concept is exactly what I was hoping for. I think if we're going to do it, we should go all in and do the whole block at the same time.
Commissioner Burns?
Looking at Sherwood, at the $1.25 million, if we put 50% back in, that's $625,000. That's a lot of money. And when I'm looking at the issues that they want done as far as the Phase 1 environmental, the survey, plumbing, mechanical, electrical, roof, sewer, septic, structural, tenant, and other testing that's required, you can get to 625 pretty quickly. In doing a historic home, and like you said, taking it apart, I've done that for 28 years in a historic home on Main Street by myself. So I know what you can find when you take the walls down. So I'm not as prone to choose this one. For the New East, I think with the $900,000 offer and then the $337,500 for the that's for the corner lot, correct? But we don't know what the appraisal is for that. So really what they're doing is this is reducing the 1.25 to 900,000, and then the lot offering 337. So really the difference between the 125 and 9, we're giving them the corner lot. Kind of in my mind, not giving it to them, but it's kind of balances out that way. So I like the New East plan though. And maybe there's some more negotiation on funding on that. The other two, I'm on the first 10th with a grant for $1.5 million. I don't think that that's, for me, I don't think that the town needs to do that. That's all I have.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to be the anomaly here. I kind of look at it a little differently. And if I understand the process right, we do not have to go up to the 50%. That would be a matter of negotiating. So I would be, Sherwood, I think as a board, we have to look at it and say, that has a completion date of August 2020. What does that mean to the board? We don't have to answer that now. What does that mean to the board, and how much does that impact our coffers, our development, et cetera? Because while New East was more specific in terms of the words, Sherwood basically had the same layout for Niven Price. And so one could argue that we come back and tell Sherwood the highest will go is 35%. I mean, that gets into the negotiation part of it and what's in our best interest. I think we have to have further discussion on that. Same with New East. So they offer 900K. My reaction would be, so we say we go lower in terms of what we'll contribute in terms of the developer agreement to get what we need out of it. And I think what that really means is we have to decide what do we want out of this. The other thing that I think we have to factor in terms of New East, that's a project that has a completion date of 2021. And I think we need staff to come back to us through Erskine and say, what's our capacity to get those things done? And how do we manage that? What's the nature of that project versus the nature of a project that basically has a year from now? So those are some questions that I think we'd ask. And obviously that one we can't answer as well because we don't know the value of the corner lot just yet. So that's the other piece of it. So I'm I look at them both, and I guess I get to where's the negotiation room to maximize what we want out of it, and then be able to come back and say which is better. I mean, on the in terms of what our goals are. Both accomplish economic development. Both hit the mark. You guys did a great job. I did my own little cheat sheet. I mean, you both came at it with the top two. I think we have to figure out a little bit more on what our appetite is as a board and as a town as to what that percentage is, and where that wiggle room is, not to exceed, not to, et cetera. So I think Commissioner Lee, you had a follow-on question?
Just a point, the Near East one also says that they would have the Niven Price building done by August 2020. The Niven Price portion.
Yeah.
Of their plan. So it's the same proposed timeline for the Niven Price portion as the other one, as the Sherwood.
Yeah. What I'm getting at is the capacity of the staff to have a 3-year project like that. That's what I'm getting at. And I think that input coming back from Erskine would be helpful.
Yes.
Because there's either one of them, there's one heck of a lot of infrastructure stuff that goes on there, and we've seen how that can take some time vis-a-vis the TAP grant, right? I mean, it is what it is. Design, all that. Given what, although we do have the sidewalks since 2014 on that one section, but. Other comments, questions? I think it would be helpful for Mr. Buckley to kind of walk us through and remind, because Commissioner DeFinis is new, but the process that this entails.
It's a simple process. It's a complex development, but it's in terms of just the sheer legal process. Once you have selected a developer, and you're making that entry right now, but once you've selected a developer as a result of these, remember, this is just proposal. This is not a contract. So this just gives you a proposal on what their vision of the project is. Now you've got to blend your vision with the selected developer to create a contract that accomplishes what the developer wants and accomplishes what you want out of this. But the process then would be, once you've selected this, you negotiate, as the mayor said, the development agreement. And you're going to set this up in a way, because it's a downtown development project under the statute, such that what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, well, this gets into the negotiation, but the recommendation would be, from a legal standpoint, that you negotiate with the developer to do both the public and the private, because this is a public-private partnership. They do the entire construction. You pay for the public infrastructure that will evolve. So that gives them back some cash flow for doing things. They pay you for the conveyance of the property. Before you can convey the property to them, you have to do a public hearing. And if you're going to have, such as one of them, where you've got two properties, they may not want to take down both of them at the same time. Take down meaning to close or to purchase. They may take one parcel first and then a second parcel at another time, within the time frame that you negotiate in the development agreement. But that development agreement is going to have a timeline in there that you're both comfortable with, the developer and the town. So you then create for the developer what his project is. He has his own contractor and his own architect. He's been working with them potentially for years. You don't have to worry about a contractor. You don't have to worry about the architect. They will provide their own. They will build the project. It will be defined in an area. If it's more than one parcel, then you're going to have something in the nature of a project boundary. And once you put that development agreement in there, you're going to have that become in perpetuity, that development agreement. And you do that simply because if halfway through the process, for whatever reason, and God forbid we have another 2008, But if that happens and the developer's financing suddenly is gone, you still have the ability to hire another developer right in. You don't have to go for RFPs. You just hire another developer to complete the project. But you've already defined the project in the original development agreement. You just need that backup. You need that protection to be able to complete the project once you begin this, you know. And we just hope that we don't get this. They keep talking about a recession. We don't want to get into that. But hopefully you will be able to go ahead, and once it's completed, he will have private ownership. And remember, that's very important on any of these. It goes to private ownership, and that's a perpetuity revenue stream to the town. Don't overlook that. You know, when you start adding A's, B's, C's, and D's, and how much money is this and how much money is that, and I'm only going to net this, well, don't forget that every bit of this is converted that's defined in the project, will be converted to private ownership, and therefore your ad valorem taxes will then suddenly be applied to something that's been off the tax rolls for years. So you'll get a revenue stream out of this no matter what, no matter which developer. You're going to get a revenue stream out of this in the future. So don't overlook that in compiling in your mind, what are we netting out of this? So don't forget about that. Which is why, one of the reasons why you want to do this, because you don't want to sit there and own those buildings in the heart of your downtown in perpetuity and lose all those tax revenues forever. You're not in the development business. They are. Let them develop, but you negotiate a contract for them to do that. Now, I'm not sure that tells you, but what I'm saying is if you add it all up, the next phase would be to select the developer. The next phase would be to enter into a development agreement through negotiation on who does what to whom and how you do it and when you do it. You put that into a project boundary. You get some recordings of those documents and the project boundaries. It's not a subdivision because you're not subdividing any property, but you would put project boundaries in there and record it, and then you've got something in perpetuity to tie you in, and then you've also got a fail-safe that if the developer, for whatever reason, can't complete, you can go forward with the project. But that's part of the language of the development agreement.
So as a follow-up question, both, I think, is it reasonable to, let me ask the question differently. We have October 8th targeted as when we'll make a decision. From your experience, how long does it take to negotiate a development agreement for a project like this?
Well, if you can give pretty good attention to it, you ought to be able to do it in.
I'm not committing you.
No, I understand, but it's worthy of not a rush approach, but it's also of urgency in the long term to get it back on the tax rolls. You don't want to negotiate this for a year. I would think in 60 to 70 days, you ought to be able to have a comprehensive, or less. It's just depending on how you and the developer are having a meeting of the minds.
Okay. Any questions from what Mr. Buckley shared? Do you want to introduce the developers at all, or that responded to the proposal, or it's up to you?
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, yes, because we appreciate their being here. Better World here. This is Bernard and Chris, and then we have New East Partners here, Matt. Sherwood Development Group here. And First Tip Construction is back there with Connie.
Thank you all for coming here.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here.
So it would see, go ahead, Curt.
I was waiting.
I was going to say, it seems like we have some digestion to do and then some parameters to establish now that we have these things in terms of some dollars, some things to some timelines, the sense of urgency, what our appetite is in terms of certain things in terms of a developer agreement that align to the original goals. And I'm assuming that would come back as well at the next work session, where we could have that discussion, along with, we'll have more information in terms of the corner lot appraisal, et cetera. What are you thinking?
Well, it sounds, does the board, I guess, first of all, is there a consensus that those two, the two developers that were mentioned, Sherwood and New East, if that's, I guess the first question is, if that's the consensus top two, does the board then want to start having direct conversations or through staff between now and the next September work session, or are you wanting to?
So let's start with the
That's a
first
discussion
question.
one, yeah.
Consensus on those two? Yep. Okay, so yes, so consensus on those two. I think some two-by meetings where you probe a little bit behind two of us in terms of getting some parameters around fine-tuning some of these things, rather than wait until the next meeting, I think would be helpful with you and Erskine, and probing a little bit so we can refine that, and so we're ready to say, hey, with consensus, here's what I heard you say overall, and this is where here's the themes, here's the consensus, so we're ready for the next meeting. I think that would be logical next step. What does the board think? I mean,
That's a good idea.
okay. So in other words, don't wait. And then, in my personal opinion, right now, I think you're the conduit to the developers until we get more specificity. Because otherwise, it's not that we wouldn't add value. It's just ideation at that point in time, and we need to stay true to our goals that we have here.
Okay.
Okay? Does that sound fair to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
I think we had
Do you have other things that you need to cover?
the date for that next work session, though, would be September 24th. Is that still good? Should basically do the 2x2s between now and September 24th,
Yeah.
and then come back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And also, for every board member, as you think about this, as we've all talked, I learned something as everybody contributed. If we have additional comments to get back to you, certainly get those back to you.
Okay.
Okay? Manager Smith, do you have anything you want to add?
No, sir. We appreciate your time and appreciate the interest of the development community in the project. I think it's something exciting for Waxhaw.
Attorney Buckley, anything to add? Okay.
Just echo what the manager said.
Okay. And with that, then we'll go ahead and adjourn and see everybody back here in about an hour.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You can't just look at it from a short-term goal. And each has its